Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is Nancy Matthews. Welcome to Columbus's year-end closing workshop. Spring Walker, one of our senior consultants, will be doing the presentation, and and if anybody does have any questions, I'm going to be monitoring the question box, and if you do have questions, just let me know. Oh, I'm already seeing this question from Sydney. Uh, our marketing people set this up, and they set it up with a with a Denmark phone number. So you need to use so there is not a US phone number, and I'm not even sure she's on this to hear me tell you that. But sorry, now we know not to let marketing do it next year. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Spring at this point.
All right, thank you so much, Nancy. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Microsoft Dynamics GP year-end closing workshop. So we will get started, and if you do have questions, just put them in the chat, and Nancy will let me know they're there. So our agenda for today, we will cover a pre-close checklist, as well as those tasks that you should do before closing. We will also cover the distribution series, and that includes purchase order processing, sales order processing, and inventory, as well as our core modules, which are receivables, payables, and the tax year end, which is optional. And then finally, our financial modules, our finance modules of fixed assets and general ledger. We have borrowed a lot of the information from the Training Dynamo year-end closing workbook. We do have those available for purchase if you'd like one of your own. They're available for $99, and you can contact Tom Hopkins at thoh@columbusglobal.com if you're interested in one of those. Also, if you need help with the year-end updates or year-end assistance or payroll assistance, we have emails for those as well. The year-end update would be a software update, which would include any form changes. This year's year-end update does include a little upgrade to the GP version that you're on, so we want to make sure that you have the right help to install those. If you need help, reach out to us-gpupgrades@columbusglobal.com. And then just general year-end assistance, if you'd like somebody to help you walk through these steps, we have that available as well through support. So us-gp support@columbusglobal.com. And payroll, since it's so personalized and customized, we always want to help you one-on-one with those rather than trying to work from a book. So happy to help you with any payroll year end. We won't be covering that today during this webinar, but you are welcome to reach out to us-gp support@columbusglobal.com, and we'll get the right payroll expert to help you. All right, so this is the closing workflow. We will start with the distribution series and then move to the core modules, and finally to any additional modules you may have, like bank rec or fixed assets. And then the last one that you do is usually the general ledger. The general ledger collects the information from all the other modules, so it's typically the last one to close. So the secret to a pain-free year-end close, it's all about doing your period end close. So if you're doing all the steps that you do at the end of each month, likely your year end will be smooth as well. So a few things that you can do to help make this run a little more smoothly would be to set up SmartList reports. You can verify things like new customers and vendors, items, GL accounts, and make sure that those are set up properly. Also, you can verify how many unposted transactions you have out there. It's best as part of any month-end close or year-end close prep to post all transactions and batches for that period. You'll also want to balance those subledgers to the GL each month. If you're doing that every month, then at the end of the year, you won't have any big surprises. And then finally, close that fiscal period. At the end of the month, once you've run your reports and done your balancing, it's very important to go ahead and close that fiscal period so nothing sneaks in after the fact. So pre-close checklists for the company and server. Check the disk space on the server. Make sure you have enough room to close. One of the more common issues that we find people have is that they didn't have enough room on the server and it stops before it gets to the end. So there's an easy way to check and make sure that you're ready to go. IT can help you with it, and I'll show you that shortly. Also, create your folders on the server so you're ready to store those printouts, any PDFs you may want to save of those year-end reports. Typically, we create one called GP year-end and the year, and then you would have a subfolder underneath that for each company to make sure things are clear. Then you want to set up your new fiscal year. Review master posting and batch recovery to make sure everything is posted all the way through. And post all batches for the year you are closing. If you can't post those batches, you're not ready to close the year yet. Get everyone out of GP. And this is very important. Make sure you have a SQL backup of Dynamics as well as all company databases. Now, we'll tell you to make a backup between every step. You don't necessarily have to make one in between every step, but at least make sure you have a really good backup before you start and then maybe before you close the general ledger. And I'll talk about that again as we go through. All right, so check server disk space. As I said, this is one of the more common issues, is that somebody runs out of space during the year-end close. You can check the table properties of the GL 20,000 table, which is the open table. And the formula that you're supposed to use is to take this row count and then multiply it by 800 and divide that total by 1,000,000. And that should tell you about how much disk space that you need. And then you can make sure that you have that much available on your C drive or whatever the main drive is. So be sure, check the disk space on the server before you close. This isn't your workstation, this is on the server itself, because that's where the processing for year-end will occur. Printing versus saving a copy. So in the general ledger, you typically print a hard copy or maybe save it as a text file. But in the other modules, saving as a text or PDF is fine. Usually you're not going to ever refer back to the other closing journals. The general ledger, it's possible, so some people do print that one out or at least save it to a PDF where they can get to it. But save paper, a lot of these reports can be really big, and you can't tell how big they are until after you print them. So at the very least, print it to the screen where you can then send it to the printer later if you want to, or to a PDF. But they can be really big, so you probably don't want to send it straight to the printer. That being said, these reports cannot be reprinted later like most posting journals can in GP. So definitely do take the time to save them if you think you may want to look back, because it's not something we can regenerate easily. Set up a new fiscal year. So for this, you'll go to Administration and then Setup, and under the company area, you'll find Fiscal Periods. There, to set up the new fiscal year, you'll want to just type in what the new year is and then put in the first and last day. Once you do that, hit Calculate. All of the periods will populate, and they will have the correct dates, starting dates for each one. Just verify they all look correct to you, and then hit, close all to make sure that nothing accidentally gets posted in there, except for the period you're going to be working in, and then hit OK. So next, we want to make sure there's nobody in GP still. So under Administration and Utilities, User Activity will show you who is logged in, and you can also see, as well as their user ID, which company they're logged into and the date and time that they got logged in. So if you see somebody that's been logged in for a week, chances are they got hung up, and you just need to remove their user. But you can still check with them before you delete that line, because if they did have something up on their screen and were working in a batch for some reason still, that could cause batch issues that you'd have to take care of later. So we don't want to cause issues. We want to take care of everything and make sure it's a nice, clean year-end close. So if you're unsure, check with them before you delete them out. Batch recovery. So batch recovery is where all of your batches go when there's a problem and they can't finish posting through. So in this case, we have a payables transaction entry batch that was kicked into batch recovery. The status just says transaction error, edit required. So the most common reason for that would be a fiscal period that's closed. So there's a date on this transaction that's within a closed fiscal period. And so what you would do is check the box and then hit continue. If you have multiple ones out here, there's a mark all where you can check them all at once. And what will happen when you hit continue varies depending on what the status is. If it says something like this, transaction error, edit required, it will become available for you to modify and edit in the original batch screen that it came from. For example, you could change the date on the batch and then save it and try to post again. If it says something like posting interrupted, then when you hit continue, it will go ahead and complete the posting immediately. So you may get posting journals that start printing out when you hit continue. So be sure to look at those statuses so you know what to expect when you hit continue. And this is something that's a good idea to check at least once a month, but fairly often so that you can see if there's anything that's hung out there. This is a common reason that your subledger could get out of balance from your ledger if there's something that posted through AP but didn't make it into GL, for example. So check for those missing transactions there in the batch recovery. Master posting, once we've made sure that there's nothing hanging out in the batch recovery, master posting is a great place to check and make sure that everything is posted. This is your one-stop shop for unposted batches. We can quickly see all of the batches for sales, for finance, for purchasing, all in the same place. So you can leave the series set to all and be able to see everything at once. You can hit mark all if you wanted to post everything and be able to post them all in one fell swoop instead of having to go back and forth in all of the different modules. Now, we see this one that's stuck in batch recovery. If we had already continued that, this would no longer say edit required, it would say available as well. But if you see something like this, that means you need to go into batch recovery and clean it up. These will not post when they look like that, and you can't open them up until you've continued them through the batch recovery process. And master posting is found under administration in the routines area and then master posting. It's right next to the batch recovery. So backup. I know I already said this once, but you'll hear me say it a couple more times through this webinar. This is a critical step. Let us help you before you try to close the year if you don't know how to perform a backup properly, or you do not have someone that is trained on how to properly perform a SQL backup. So let us help if you have either of those situations. We can log in and quickly make a backup with you, or your IT can do it for you a lot of times. But what we're looking for is a SQL, an SQL backup. Having a backup of the files is not good enough. We want an actual SQL backup. It'll end in a BAK. So those are the files that we're looking for to make sure that we can quickly restore if necessary, if anything goes wrong during the closing process. So again, before beginning closing, make and retain a complete SQL backup of Dynamics and all your company databases. The Dynamics database is your system database, so that's what contains all of your security and settings that are applied to all of the databases. Do not rely on your nightly backup and assume that you have a good backup. Always make sure you make a fresh one for year-end close, or at least verify that that backup from last night is there and accessible before you move forward. So moving on to the actual modules. Here we go in distribution with purchase order processing. So the first thing we want to talk about is the period end checklist. So this is part one. And again, these are the processes that you should be doing at the end of every month. If you're doing this at the end of every month, you're just doing the final one for December before you close the year. So here we want to enter, review, and post all purchase order processing transactions for the period. So this would include PO shipments, shipment invoices, and returns. If you have empty, unused batches sitting out there, so batches that maybe you thought you were going to use and then they never were utilized, go ahead and delete those. It just helps to clean it up. Chances of someone going back and using that batch are pretty slim, and if they do, they might forget to change the date, and so that batch could try to post into the wrong period. So it's just best to delete those unused batches so that people don't forget to change the date. Then you want to print your received not invoiced report. So this is important. This helps you to tie out your purchase order, what's been received, to your accrued purchases account. So the next step is to balance that received not invoiced report to the balance of the accrued purchases account. So you could have one account or more than one, but you want to make sure that that report ties out. It's a quick way to find out if there's something that didn't get entered into the invoice correctly. If someone put it into AP, for example, rather than the purchase order enter match invoices, then that step could get missed, and the balance could stay in accrued purchases. So make sure that you are tying that out every month, or it can get to be quite the process to, to figure it out later. And then finally, optionally, you can remove completed purchase orders. So if you've been using the system for a while and you have some old purchase orders that you would like to get rid of, this is a good time to do it. And you can remove those. Now, the first thing we want to do before we close the year in purchase order is to make sure that we are maintaining history. So we can do that by verifying the setup. Under purchasing, setup, and then purchase order processing. And then right here in the middle, there's this maintain history section. We just want to make sure all of those are checked. They are checked by default, so we're just checking to make sure no one has inadvertently unchecked them. If we move something to history and we're not maintaining history, then we're just removing it from the system. Removing completed POs. So in this screen, it's under purchasing, and then routines, and then remove completed purchase orders. And so you'll put in your vendor, and you can put in a range of vendor IDs if you like, or you can let it be for all vendors. There's also a date range, I believe, in this document range as well, if you wanted to do it by dates instead. But you insert your range and then click on restrictions. When you click on restrictions, this restrict purchasing documents window becomes available, and you can see all the POs that are going to be removed. There's and in the process column, there is a checkbox, and so you can just uncheck any of them that you don't want to be removed. There's also a mark all or an unmark all button. So if you want to unmark most and just check a few, you could unmark all and then go back and just select the ones you want. Once you've made your final selections, you'll hit the process button here to go ahead and move those into history. So the next step, purchase order processing year-end close. So complete the period end checklist for the final period of the year. There isn't a special routine button or utility for purchase order processing year end. So you're just doing your cleanup like you do every month, and then maybe removing those old POs to clean things up a little. Moving on to sales order processing. So we'll start with our period end checklist. We would again enter, review, and post all sales order processing transactions for the period. Delete any empty, unused batches that we may have out there. Post all GL batches that were created by SOP or by sales order processing. So that means to check under the financial batches and make sure that everything has posted through and nothing is hanging out there after you post through in sales. Then we want to verify the sales order processing history settings. And then optionally, we can remove and reconcile-remove those sales documents. And we'll choose the remove option. Then finally, we'll close the fiscal period under administration, setup, company, and fiscal periods. So let's step through this. To see the sales setup to verify that we are in fact maintaining history, you would go to Sales and then under Setup, look for Sales Order Processing Setup. And here we want to make sure that the Maintain History options are all marked. Again, they are marked by default, but we're just checking to make sure nothing has happened and they've been unmarked throughout the year. Now this step is optional. Reconcile-Remove Sales Documents is a screen that you can find under Utilities. So it's under Sales, Utilities, and then Reconcile-Remove Sales Documents. And again, we want to make sure that you have a backup before you do this because you are removing sales documents, moving them to history. And so here we can choose a range of document numbers, or you can leave it set to all. And there's an option here to reconcile, and there's one to remove. So if you are reconciling, it's a good practice to leave it marked to print the report only first and hit process. And what that will do is to print an edit list of which items are going to be removed. Then finally, you can click process when you're ready without the print report only marked, and that will step through the process again and actually remove those documents. So remember, you can get an edit list by checking the box and hit process. If everything looks okay, then you can uncheck that option and go ahead and process again. So the sales order processing year-end close, you want to complete the period end checklist for your last period, and then optionally we can close the tax year-end close. There's not a special routine button or utility for sales order processing year-end close. Timing. So this is one of the more common questions. Timing is very important for payables and receivables. If you enter transactions for the next year before you can complete the closing process, try to enter them into a batch and save, and don't post. The year-to-date information will be incorrect on some inquiry screens and SmartList fields if you post those transactions for the new year before closing. So if you have a workbook, you can refer to pages 28 and 29 for more information. But basically there are certain fields that get reset during the year-end close. And so, number of invoices this year and things like that would be incorrect if you don't, if you are posting things into the new year before you close. That being said, there are also some options you can change so that you will see the correct information, because most of it is date sensitive, with the exception of a few SmartList fields and inquiry screens that you can't get to, that don't change otherwise. So here's an example of some of the things that could be incorrect if we enter in new information before we close the year. So in this case, we're looking at payables. And in the sample above, the 1099 year-to-date information for this calendar year should be $12,895. We see that in the vendor yearly summary inquiry screen as long as the summary view is set to calendar year. However, we can see in this other screenshot, when the summary view is set to amount since last close, we see only $3,500. And that is because of the way the year was closed. It wasn't closed right at the year end, and so some things were in last year that should have actually been included in the year to date. So these two numbers should have been added together in this case. So in the SmartList, the standard SmartList that we have under vendors, that's for 1099 vendors, if we pull in 1099 amounts year to date, this will be incorrect. So if we can close the year before we enter those new transactions, that is the best practice. That means everywhere that you find the information, it will be accurate. However, if that's not possible at your office, then it's good to be aware of which screens would be inaccurate. Of course, your 1099s amounts will still be correct. It's just that this particular SmartList isn't going to reflect that. So you would need to use the edit lists from the 1099 screen rather than using this SmartList if you know you didn't close on time. So anyway, if you can close right at the end of the year or before we enter those new transactions, that is best. You can save those new ones into a batch and then post them once you're ready. So receivables management period end checklist. First, again, post all AR transactions for the period. You can use master posting or you can use the series post under sales for that. We want to apply, so review the unapplied documents report or SmartList to see what is out there that needs to be applied. When those documents aren't applied, then they're not going to fall off of your aging reports. So we want those to be able to be more accurate. So apply anything that you can. Go ahead and run the aging process for customer balances. Remember, in receivables, the aging process does not happen automatically, and that is so that your collections efforts can be in line with any reports that you may run. So aging is done when as a manual process. Then you want to print your historical age trial balance dated for the last day of the period. And the historical age trial balance is the same as the age trial balance, except that it can go back to a particular date. So that's why we say dated for the last day of the period. Finally, we want to balance that historical age trial balance report and the GL balance for the AR accounts. So make sure those tie out and that there are no issues there. And then you can close the fiscal period under administration, setup, company, and fiscal period. And there is a process that can help you tie out the AR balance to that the transactions in the receivables module, and we'll get to that a little bit later after we talk about financial. So this is the receivables management period end checklist. You can find it under sales, routines, and checklists. And then you can choose the module and the frequency. Under sales, you would also see sales order processing here. We can choose month end for our frequency. There would also be a year end in there. You can see the suggested things that they have added. If you double click on any of these, it would open up the screen associated with it. So check batch recovery is one of the options here. If I double click on that, it would pop me right into batch recovery. I could verify everything looks good and is clear. And then what would happen is after you get out of that screen, this will reflect that you went into it. So this check batch recovery would now say today's date and time, and you'd see SA or whatever user I'm logged in as. Now, one thing to be careful of in this screen is that it doesn't know whether you actually completed the task. So if I double click on batch recovery and go into the screen, that's all I have to do in order for it to update the date and my user ID. It doesn't mean that I actually completed the process. It just means that I opened the screen. So if you do have any problems with something or don't get to complete it, be sure you go back in because it's going to look like you completed it to anyone else who comes into this later. So this is kind of a user-friendly screen in that you can add, or you can also modify the things that are here or remove anything that you don't want. So the add button, you click add and be able to add any screens that you want to have as part of your month-end close. And then if there was anything that needed to be modified, maybe you just want to change the name of it. You can click on it and hit modify and be able to address those things. And then finally, we have top, up, down, and bottom, and that just helps you move things around so that they're in the correct order that makes most sense to you. Ideally, you would have these in the order that you want to actually do them so that you can just go down the list. So this is our unapplied documents report that I mentioned. It's under sales, reports, analysis, and unapplied documents. And here you can choose a sort option if you want and choose a range. In this example, we've done document type from credit memo to payments so that we're only seeing those particular document types in here. Of course, be sure to click on destination and make sure that it's going to your screen or to the correct printer. This is a SmartList for unapplied documents, And you can find that under Sales and then under Receivables Transactions. And here we can see the customers along with the original transaction amount and the current transaction amount. So if the current transaction amount is not 0, then that means that it has not been applied to anything, or is not fully applied at least. Next, we want to go ahead and age those AR balances. So again, accounts receivable balances do not automatically age in Microsoft Dynamics GP. This allows you to keep your balances in the same buckets as your collection letters and statements. You should age AR at least once a month. Many of our clients choose to age every day or at least once per week. So the receivables aging process is found under Sales, Routines, and Aging. And usually people will change the report option from Detail, which I believe is the default, over to No Report. You can put in the date that you want to age as of, and then hit Process. It's a very quick process. You'll hit Process, and then it'll be done before you know it. And if you have no report, you'll just know it's done because the screen will close. If you want to print one of these reports, they'll be similar to your aging report, but it doesn't have options to exclude fully paid documents and things like that. So it tends to be a bigger report, a thicker report. So next, we can write off underpayments or overpayments. And there is a wonderful little utility that you can use to accomplish this and do multiple documents at once. So this can be found under Sales, Routines, and Write-Off Documents. And again, it can be for underpayments or overpayments. So here in the write-off type, you would choose if you want to remove the underpayments or the overpayments, and then create one write-off per customer or one write-off per document. On the right, you can put in your write-off limit and whatever the cutoff date is. And then you can even do a range of customers or customer classes if you only wanted to do certain people. And if you use national accounts, there's an option here at the bottom to create a write-off from the parent or create the write-off from the child. So it depends on where we want that write-off to land. Once you have everything filled in the way you want it, you can hit Process and it'll go ahead and do everything. Or what I like to do is hit that Preview button first. If we hit the Preview button, we'll see a list of all of the write-offs that the system is going to create, and it will create a debit memo or a credit memo to clear those out. And so you'll see the customers, and then within the customers, what individual documents will be written off, and can check or uncheck them as wanted. And then at that point, you can hit Process from within that preview screen, or you can come back here and hit Process on the main screen as well. So this is a nice way to clean up any outstanding documents. Be sure that you check before you do this that the customer has a write-off account associated with them on the Accounts tab of the Customer Maintenance screen, or make sure that you have write-offs set up under the Posting accounts. So under Administrations, Setup, Posting, and Posting Accounts. Make sure something is there for write-offs if you plan to do this document or do this process. Otherwise, you will wonder why nothing is coming in. Somebody might have something that needs to be written off, but if there is no account or their option is set to not allow write-offs, they won't pull in and you won't get an error. So make sure that the customer is set to allow write-offs and that they have a write-off account in order to do this little utility. So verifying the customer history settings, we would want to go ahead and make sure that we are tracking history for our customers. You can check this on any individual customer by opening up the customer maintenance screen, which is under Cards and Customer in the Sales area page, and then clicking on the Options button at the bottom. Here we see the Maintain History section, and we can verify everything is marked. By the way, this is where that maximum write-off is that I was talking about. So we'd want to make sure that this had a maximum set or was unlimited. If it's set to not allow, then the little utility will not work. And under accounts is where you would find that write-off account if you were looking for that under the individual customers. So next we want to use a SmartList to verify the customer history settings. So instead of going through one by one, you can create a quick little SmartList for this. So expand sales, and then you would expand the customers object, and then we want to create a new one. So you can grab any of them to start, and then you'd add columns. So you would click on the columns button, and you'd look for keep calendar history, keep distribution history, keep period history, and keep transaction history. And you'd want to select all of those. So what you do is click on columns and then add. And if you type a K, it'll take you down to where those Ks are. And then you can select one and hold down Control or Shift to be able to select the others. Once you have them in your SmartList and they're visible, then we want to save it so that you can use it again without having to go back and add those columns next time. So you'd click Favorites and enter a name and then Add as a new favorite. And that will make it available for the next time that you're closing the month or closing the year, that you can quick double check for that. Finally, when you are reviewing this, when you're using this SmartList to work from, remember that SmartLists are a working list. That's one of the reasons that we love them so much. So here I can see that Adam Park Resort has the keep period history turned off. So the easiest way to fix that would be to double click on that record, and it would open up the customer maintenance screen, and I could quickly change that history option without scrolling through all my customers one by one. So that's the steps to create a SmartList. The next step would be to move your paid transactions to history. So this is under Sales, Routines, and then Paid Transaction Removal. So here, Microsoft Dynamics GP does not automatically move AR transactions to history when they're fully paid or applied the same way that it does on the AP side. This allows you to unapply and void if needed. If you have an NSF or if something comes back, or even if it's just applied to the wrong invoice and you need to move it around, being able to unapply and reapply to different invoices is only available before it gets moved to history. So it's best to keep items in the open status until after the payments have been cleared from the bank and until you're sure that you're not going to need to reapply them to anything. So once you're ready, the paid transaction removal is under Sales, Routines, Paid Transaction Removal. You can choose a customer range or class range if you wanted to. And then you want to mark all these boxes to remove the NSFs, the voids, the waived finance charges, any paid transactions, and any checks. And then you can put in a cutoff date, and that would apply to the NSFs as well as the checks. On the right, you have an option here to print the register, and that's just going to print a little report for you. At that point, you would hit Process. The Receivables Management Year-End Close Checklist. So we reviewed and post our AR batches for the year we're about to close. We're going to complete the period end checklist for the last period. Then we want to print the historical age trial balance report dated for the last day of the year, along with an age trial balance with options as of the current date. And doing that just makes sure that there's no data issues. Those reports pull the data in differently. And so by verifying that they are both pulling the same balance, it's a good best practice to make sure that there's no surprises out there that may have been caused by bad apply dates. Next, we want to make sure that we have a good SQL backup, because now we're doing the year-end close and we want to have a good backup before we do our year-end. Then we're ready to do that close. So this is, you can close the fiscal and or calendar year under Sales, Routines, and Year-End Close. Remember, save that year-end close report to the GP year-end folder. And then optionally, we can close the sales tax periods for the year under administration, routines, and tax year-end close. So we will step through that. So the first step is to go ahead and get into that year-end close screen. So again, this was under sales, routines, and year-end close. And you'll notice here that you can close all or the fiscal or calendar year. So in this case, we're talking about the calendar year typically. So we would go ahead and select calendar if we have a different fiscal year. But if our calendar year is the same as our fiscal year, we can leave it set to all. You can also see the last time that each one was closed. So in this case, you can tell that it was a calendar year, and so they closed both at the same time in 2015 the last time. And you can choose whether or not to print that report. We recommend printing the report and saving it to a file. When ready, you would hit process. These are examples of what the year-end close report might look like from Receivables. You can see some territory summaries as well as salesperson and customer summaries. These reports can be quite large, so it's a good idea to print them to a file. And they are not critical. Usually this is not any information that anyone looks back at typically. So save them to a file just in case, but I would not print these out and then save them into a file folder. So receivables fields that are changed by the year-end close. So here we have last year. So the year-end close process will summarize activity since your last close to calculate the last year fields. So average days to pay, finance charges, high balances, total number of invoices or finance charges are all reset, as well as discounts, returns, total sales, write-offs. Those are all going to be summarized and then updated into the last year fields. The year-to-date fields will be cleared. So the year-end close process will clear the activity since your last close in the year-to-date fields. Average days to pay for the year, finance charges, total costs, returns, total sales, and write-offs would all be cleared off. Finally, the tax year-end close. So this is only done once, and it can be done either after the sales order processing close or as part of the receivables management closing. It's under administration, routines, and then tax year-end close. Here you would just mark the option to close the year and or print the report. Excuse me. If you would like to see what's going to happen before you close the year, this is another place where you could uncheck the close year and just get the report as sort of an edit list. That's usually not necessary though. Most people will just leave both marked and hit process. So moving on to payables management and starting with our period end checklist. So first we would review and post all AP batches for the period we're closing. We would check the batch recovery window, make sure there are no issues out there waiting. Print our payables period end reports. So that might include the historical age trial balance as of the last day of the previous period. Reconcile your payables to the GL. And then finally close the AP fiscal period. So that would be under administration, setup, company, and fiscal period. So again, there is a checklist in GP under purchasing this time, and then routines and checklists. And there we can choose the frequency that we want and see the screens that are suggested to do during our month-end close. And then of course we can add any additional windows that we may want to use or modify. Payables management year-end prep list. So this is in preparation for the year-end close. Be sure that we order the 1099 forms and envelopes. You can get those from anywhere, whatever provider you are used to working with is fine, Office Depot or Staples or wherever you can run out and get them. We don't recommend using the free ones that you can get from the IRS. They tend to be too thin and tend to get stuck in the printer. Next, verify the 1099 vendor setup. You can see Appendix 5 for a SmartList to verify the 1099 setup, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. You want to correct any duplicate vendors. So if we have several vendors or more than one vendor that's set up for someone that's a 1099, it's nice to go ahead and merge those together so that you get one 1099 rather than having separate ones. So call us if you need help merging those vendors together. There is a tool that's built right into GP. You just have to be an administrator and know the rules of how to do it in order to get that done. So no additional purchases. It's something you already own. It's just you probably need a little guidance to get those merged. Next, you'd want to review your 1099 data. Print the 1099 edit list would be the safest way to do that, especially if you didn't close the year right on time or before you started entering new transactions. We already showed how that SmartList could get a little off. So if you're not sure when that was done, then printing the edit list is the safest place to go. Then make any 1099 vendor or data corrections, and make sure you alert the AP team of when you plan to close the year. They need to have everything entered, reviewed, and posted before you can close the year. So to verify the vendor history settings, this is under purchasing, and then in the setup area page, under cards, you'd find vendor maintenance. And here we can look up the vendor that we're concerned about, click options, and be able to see that maintain history. Again, by default, they are all marked. We just want to make sure nothing got unmarked during this process. You can also verify while you're in there, this tax type is set to not a 1099 vendor, or if it's set to miscellaneous or interest or rent, I think is the other. So Payables year-end checklist. And I didn't say it, but you could, of course, create a SmartList for those vendors and add the keep history columns the same way that we did on the customer side, so that you can review more than one at once. So on our year-end checklist, again, make sure everything is posted. Review and post that all AP batches for the year are posted and ready. Then complete the period end checklist for the last period. Then print the historical age trial balance as of the last day of the year and the age trial balance with options as of today. Compare the two and make sure that you're in balance. Again, if you haven't recently, make a new SQL backup. Make sure that you have that on hand. Dynamics and company databases, both. Then you want to go ahead and print those 1099 forms. Those are the ones that are going to go to the IRS and to your vendors. And then the 1096 is the summary form that'll go to the IRS. Then you can close the calendar or fiscal year. So printing the 1099 forms, you can find that under Payables, Routines, and Print 1099. There you just want to verify the company name and choose the correct address if it's not already selected. Here you can key in your payer's federal ID number so that it prints into all the forms. You would choose the correct 1099 year and type of 1099s that you're sending out right now. The most common is miscellaneous, but the other types are under there as well. And you would do each one one at a time if you're printing multiple types of 1099s. So here you can put in a range of vendors, but we find it's best to just leave it set to all so that none of them get missed by being in the wrong class or something like that. Here at the bottom, we can choose what order we want them in. So they can be in order by the vendor ID, the vendor name, the zip code. I forget what the other options are, but there's several options. And then you want to make sure that this print option is set to the correct form that you're wanting to print at that time. So 1099 form, of course, would print to the 1099 form, and you would print that onto those pre-printed forms. An alignment is just a way to see if all of the data was filled in, where would it print? And that would print out with X's. And so you could print that onto one of your forms and make sure that it looks okay. The 1096, again, that's that summary form that we send off to the IRS. So typically we do that at the end after we've printed all of the 1099s. So with this set to 1099, we can click on the little printer icon on the right-hand side there to get an edit list to verify what 1099s we're going to print and make sure that everything looks accurate. If we hit the print button on the left, then that will actually print the forms themselves. This is using the menu options. If you are using the action pane, if you're on a newer version of GP, then you'll see this action pane, and it looks a little bit different. Here, it's very obvious what you want. You would go to the print forms to print the actual forms, and the print would get you the edit list. But if you happen to be on an older version and it looks like this, just remember it's the printer icon that gives you the edit list, and the print button will actually print the forms themselves. So payables management year-end close. If your fiscal year does not equal your calendar year, you'll need to schedule these closes on different dates. The calendar year close will affect the year-to-date amounts on the SmartList and inquiry windows. So here is the year-end close screen. We can find it under Purchasing, Routines, and then Year-end Close. And if your calendar and fiscal year are the same, again, we would leave it set to all. If they're different, right now we're closing the calendar year, so we would select calendar. There is a print report option, and we can verify the last time that they were closed for the fiscal and calendar year. When you're ready, you just hit close year and wait for that report to print. This is an example of what that payables management report might look like. Again, it can be a very large report. It only prints about 3 vendors per page. So if you have a lot of vendors, you can imagine that this could be a pretty big report. So again, just save it to a text file. I can't think of any time that someone has actually looked back at this for anything after their close. So these are some of those fields that are changed by the year-end close process. So we have the last year fields. So remember the year-end close process summarizes the activity since your last close to calculate the following fields. So it's going to update the 1099 amount year to date, would close that and get moved to last year. Amount paid, discounts taken, finance charges, write-offs. So all of those things will get reset as part of the year-end close. Also, year to date, so this process will clear the activity since your last close in the year to date fields. So here we have the 1099 amounts year to date and the discount taken for year to date and returns and write-offs. So all of these year to date fields will be cleared out and summarized into the last year fields. So a few inquiries and SmartList fields that are updated after the year is closed. So if we look at the vendor yearly summary screen, there's an option there for amounts since last close. That also means there's an option there to change that to calendar year or fiscal year and just hit recalculate. So in this screen, you can see the correct numbers, but remember in the SmartList, it's going to pull in what it was since the last close. That's not an option in the SmartList. So make sure that we are closing as close to the end of the year as possible, where possible. And here we can see those same fields in a SmartList. So the SmartList is the easiest way to see everything at once. But again, remember that some of these fields may not be accurate if you didn't close before you entered in new transactions. All right, so moving on to inventory. This is our period end checklist, and we would want to review and post any inventory stock counts and adjustments for the period we're closing. We also want to check the batch recovery window again and make sure that nothing has ended up in there having some sort of error. Then we'd want to print the stock status report and probably the historical inventory trial balance reports. That one's actually also called the HITB, the HITB, and that's a way to balance back to the GL. Then we want to verify the item history settings. If you're following in the book, then this would be in Appendix 3, a SmartList to verify history settings in your workbook. Reconcile to the GL. So this would be Appendix 7. We are going to step through this. And then finally, close your fiscal period. So that would be under Administration, Setup, Company, Fiscal Periods. So that was the period end checklist. This is our year end checklist. So first step, complete the period end checklist for the final period. Then post all inventory transactions for the year we're closing. Print the inventory stock status report. Reconcile inventory quantities. And we say that's optional, but you really should reconcile at least probably once a year. So year end is often a good time to do that. That process can take quite a while, so make sure that you maybe kick it off on an evening or over a weekend so it has plenty of time to run if you have a lot of inventory. Complete an annual physical count. You can use the stock count entry window, or you can manually enter variance transactions. Some people prefer to not use the stock count entry screen because they have a lot of zero balance items that don't have anything on hand, and you have to check them off as counted even if you don't have them. So some people will skip to the variance transactions. However, the stock count will give you a nice history of the last time that you counted. Then finally, make another backup. If you didn't just make one, make another one. Sometimes we don't close inventory on the same date that we closed AR and AP. So if that's the case, make sure that you do have a backup before this close. So the inventory year-end close window has a few options on it that can be a little confusing to some folks. So we can remove discontinued items. We can remove sold lot attributes if we're tracking lot numbers. And we can also remove the sold receipts and change the cost and the cost change history prior to a certain date. So what that means is that, GP collects the lines of receipts that as you receive things into GP, and that could be through purchase orders or inventory adjustments or or sales returns even. However that receipt occurs, it creates a line with that cost in it, and it will maintain that cost so that you know the accurate cost to assign to when it's sold and get the exact profit. Well, if you've been on GP for 20 years, then you probably have a lot of sold receipt lines that you don't really need anymore. You're probably not going back more than a year or two. So a lot of people, if they've been on the system a long time, might check the box and put a date that's 2 years back or 3 years back. And that just means it would remove those lines as long as they were completely sold prior to that date. These options are typically left unchecked. So if you're not sure, just leave them unchecked. It just means everything will stay there as it is now. If you were looking to remove some items and were wishing that there was a way to do that, that's part of the benefit of the year-end close process. You can mark them as discontinued and remove them through the year-end close. So if you need help with that, feel free to reach out. We'd be more than happy to help you walk through this to verify that you have no lingering questions or are concerned about what might happen. So inventory close, what happened? Even though no report prints when you closed inventory, something did happen in the background. All summarized current year information is moved to history for items keeping summarized sales history, including quantities, costs, and sales information. The beginning quantity of each item is updated to be the on-hand quantity at each site, and the quantity sold for each item is reset to 0. So we can see that on our item quantities and sites screen or on the item inquiry screen. Those both show those quantity sold and on-hand quantities and things like that. That's where we can see that it's reset that sold number and updated the on-hand to the beginning quantity. Now, fixed assets is typically closed separately from the other modules, or it can be. It is not quite as integrated as the others, as it has its own GL posting window and can create that entry at any time. So you want to make sure before you close the fixed assets that you've done your period end processing first. So enter all activity for the current period, including any asset additions, changes, transfers, or retirements. Then you want to process depreciation for the period that you're closing and create a fixed asset GL transaction using the GL posting window. Again, this module is a little bit different than the others in that it doesn't send over its general ledger entries right away. They are collected in the fixed asset module, and then a routine is run to create that entry whenever you're ready. So you definitely need to do that at least once a month. Then you would post the general ledger batch that gets created. That would be under your financial batches. And then you can print any activity reports that you may be interested in. So that's all part of your period end processing. Once that's done, you're ready for your year end. So again, complete your period end checklist for the final period, then enter and post all fixed asset transactions for the year you are closing. And again, that could include asset additions, changes, transfers, or retirements. Process asset depreciation through the last day of the fiscal year you were closing. Now, you may have already done these 2 steps because you did your period end close. Create the GL transactions using the GL posting window and post. Again, print any reports, any activity reports you're interested in. Make a backup if you didn't have one. And close the year. So this is under financial, routines, fixed assets, and year end. So this is the depreciation window, and this is part of both the month-end close and your year-end close. And so if you have a group, you can depreciate that group, but more commonly we're depreciating all assets. So you can check the box here and put in the target date for your depreciation, then select the books that you want to depreciate and insert them. When ready, hit the depreciate button and it will depreciate and the window will close. There is a little progress bar that'll go across the bottom here. There isn't a report. And this was found in the financial routines under fixed assets and depreciate. Notice there is a reverse depreciation option here. So in case you did accidentally put the wrong date or something, then you can reverse the depreciation by putting the date you should have had it through, and it will back out any depreciation necessary to put you back to that date. This is the fixed asset general ledger posting screen. We can access it through financial, routines, fixed assets, and then GL posting. So this is how we get the information that we've been collecting in fixed assets over to the GL. Before this is done, there are no journal entries related to fixed assets. So it creates a batch and you can put in the date you want to post. Typically, we leave this set to all, and then you hit process. When you hit process, that's when this populates, and we can see the asset IDs, the source types, the account numbers, and the debits and credits that are going to create this entry. So you can actually scroll through these and see what's going to happen before you create that entry. If everything looks good, you go ahead and hit this post button. This will create that entry for you to be able to post over in the GL. So this is my fixed asset journal entry. You can see the batch is that FATRX number that it had in the GL posting screen. And we can see the date, and it'll create that entry. So all you're doing in the financial area is posting that batch, or if you wanted to look at the transaction first, you can look at the journal entry before you post it. So this is the fixed asset year-end close window, and it can be found under financial, routines, fixed assets, and then year-end. And you don't have to close all of your books at once. So if you have multiple books, you may intentionally leave your federal or your tax book out if there's something that you may be getting some adjustments or something that needs to be handled differently from an accountant. But the one you want to close is the internal book. So if you have an internal or corporate or financial book, whichever one is connected to the GL, that's the one that you need to make sure you close before you keep going, and that keeps everything in line. General rule, we don't want to enter any new assets, and that includes additions before we close the year. So starting year-end processing for fixed assets will be the message you get when you hit continue here, and then you'll hit continue there to go ahead and continue with the process. You do get a report in the fixed asset year-end close screen. It looks something like this. Again, it's a year-end close report, so typically you'd want to just save it somewhere. But you could, this one isn't too long, so you can print it out if you'd rather. So finally, we're ready to talk about the general ledger, the main one people are usually worried about. So here is our period end checklist. We want to enter, review, and post all manual journal entries for the period. Then enter, review, and post any recurring entries. Review and post any GL batches that originated from the subledgers for the period you're closing. Then check your batch recovery window. Make sure there's nothing hanging out there that maybe got stuck because of an incorrect posting date. Be sure you print your trial balance worksheet and make any needed adjusting entries. Then print a final trial balance report and print any financial statements you may need. And then you're ready to close the fiscal period. So once again, administration, setup, company, fiscal periods. So now to the year end. So perform your final period end close for the final period of the year. Then verify all account type balances, account types. So balance sheet versus P&L. So you can create a SmartList to look for these, where we show under accounts what posting type the accounts are. That's usually the quickest way. You can also run reports to look at them. So then you want to review the general ledger setup window. And the reason we're checking there is we want to make sure the retained earnings account is there and make sure that everything is properly marked. Then we print the GL trial balance reports and financial reports. Again, backup. Make sure you have a SQL backup of Dynamics and the company databases. And even if you were closing everything else before, if it's been a while since you did a backup and you don't want to go back through those steps, might be worth taking another backup at this point. Verify the new fiscal year is set up and close the fiscal period, excuse me, fiscal periods for the year being closed. So that's under administration, setup, company, and fiscal periods. Make sure that you've created the new year and close the old one. Then finally close the general ledger for the fiscal year. Print and save a copy of the GL close report. Again, it cannot be rerun later, so if you think you may need it, at least save it to a PDF. So general ledger posting account types. This is the most common issue that we hear about when it comes to closing the GL. Balance sheet accounts, the activity for the year is summarized and moved forward as a beginning balance for each account for the new year. Balance sheet accounts typically include inventory, cash, accounts payable, accounts receivable. Profit and loss accounts, the activity in these accounts are summarized into the retained earnings account for the year. Then profit and loss accounts typically include profits such as sales and income, as well as losses such as cost of goods sold, administrative expenses, or payroll expenses. So here on the account maintenance screen, you can verify any individual account and verify that it has the correct posting type assigned to it. Since the default is balance sheet, most of the trouble that we find is that there is a P&L account that should have that is set up as balance sheet and should be profit and loss. So it's a quick check to do a SmartList and pull on that posting type to make sure that your accounts are all going the right direction before you close. Then review the general ledger setup window. So under financial setup and general ledger, we can find the general ledger setup screen. So first thing we want to check is make sure that there is a retained earnings account populated. And then if the closed to divisional account segments checkbox is marked, then you have to have a retained earnings account for all P&L groups based on that segment. So that means that any P&L account, if we closed out to segment 1, for example, all of our P&L accounts, if they had a 001, then we would need to have a retained earnings with a 001. Any value that could be in that first segment for our retained earnings accounts needs to exist and retain earnings for all those P&L possibilities. You will get an error and the year-end close will stop if you don't have all of those created before the year-end close process starts. So remember, closing to the divisional account segment means you have to have all of those counts existing. And be sure to reach out if you need any help with this. Finally, we want to verify those maintain history settings. We want to make sure that they're all marked. What we are doing when we're closing the year is moving the open year to history. So if we don't, if we're not maintaining those accounts and transactions, we could just remove them rather than moving them to history. Now finally, back up again. If you have done any work since your last backup, it's time to do one again. Most year-end close errors happen while the GL is being closed. So it is critical that you back up before closing the GL. Before beginning the year-end closing process, make and retain a complete SQL backup of the Dynamics and company backups, company databases. Do not rely on your nightly backup. So again, what we're looking for is that .bak file, an SQL backup, not a backup of the whole drive or any files that they may have backed up. We don't want a copy of the MDF file. We want an actual BAK backup file. So you will most likely get this warning message. This GL close warning message pops up anytime you have any batches open. So when you click close, you will see this pop up if you have any unposted GL batches. If you have confirmed that no transactions exist for the year you're closing, then go ahead and click continue. So if you've already done your due diligence and you've looked at the master posting and you've checked the batch recovery, then you can just continue on past this error message. The system is not looking for dates when it pops this up. It is only noticing that there are batches out there. So they could be for the new year and you're not ready to post them yet, or recurring batches that you're not ready to post again yet. So you will get this message. just go ahead and click continue as long as you're confident that everything has posted through. So here, our general ledger year-end closing window. So a couple things that have been added, new options for maintaining inactive accounts, as well as a more complete status bar are very nice. So first thing we'll notice here is that retained earnings account is populated. Again, we just saw that in the setup, so we're not surprised to see that populate here. The next starting journal entry number, some people will reset that journal entry for the new year. That's not required, of course. It can just keep going at the number that it's at. These check boxes are to remove unused segment numbers. So if you've been creating segments for your chart of accounts and keeping those numbers, if there are some that maybe you thought you were going to use and you never did, it can remove those from the segments screen for you. The maintain inactive accounts is a little bit more pertinent, more informational. So here, we want to make sure if you have inactive accounts that have zero balances and you want to keep them, then you want to check this box to maintain those inactive accounts. Once the box is checked, you'll have the option to either maintain just those accounts that had budget amounts or all inactive accounts. So if you're not sure, best practice is to mark the box and then choose all inactive accounts. And that just means even though they are inactive and they have a zero balance, I want to keep them. I'll figure it out later if I want to get rid of them individually. Also notice that they have added a reverse historical year button. This is really exciting if you've ever had an issue during year-end close. For example, if we realize after we close that we missed an account that should have been P&L and it was set up as balance sheet, we could actually come in, reverse the historical year, which undoes the year-end close, then we could go fix our problem and close it again. So it's really great that they have given us this option to reverse that out. Hopefully you don't ever need to use it, but it is there just in case. And so once you've verified the year-end retained earnings and the correct options, you'll just click that close year button. Now be patient. This year-end close process can take several hours. It just depends on how many transactions you have out there in that open year that it's trying to close out and how many accounts you have. So do not double click that close button. Do not end task using the Windows Task Manager. Do not force GP to close, and do not shut down your workstation or the server until it is finished. To get your year-end close report, as we said, it's nice to print it to the screen so you know it's done, but then also maybe print it to the file and maybe even the printer as well. Remember, you can send it to the printer from the screen, so that option is up to you. But typically people will at least save it as a text file, or there's also sometimes a PDF option down here as well if you have Adobe installed. This is an example of what that year-end close report might look like. It's going to have a line for all of the accounts that it closed out to the retained earnings. Once that process is complete, you'll see the process is complete, you've gotten your report, and then you can see this last closing date. Now, this date will always show as 12/31 if that's the end of your year, even if you do close it, you know, January 15th, it'll still show 12/31 because that was the last day of the year. Whereas the receivables and payables will show the actual day you closed them. So here you would click the X just to get out of that screen once it's done. So a couple of notes, unlike AP and AR, General Ledger does not need to be closed before posting to the new year. GP will automatically group transactions for the last fiscal year when closing. So until you close, reports and inquiry windows will not include beginning balances. So if you run a balance sheet, for example, you are not going to have any beginning balances if you haven't closed the General Ledger yet. Now, before closing the year, it's important to verify account types. If you find an account was set up incorrectly, when we're talking about profit and loss versus balance sheet, call us. We can help you fix it. The fix for some of these requires changes in SQL to get through it most quickly, but now that we have that reverse year-end close, that can help if it's something small. So Appendix 1. This is sending a message to your GP users. This is available on Dynamics GP 2013 R2 and higher. So this is nice. It's under Administration, Utilities, System, and then send users a message. So here you would select the users or a company that you want to send out by send to. Then you can choose the method or delivery option. So you can send the message as a notification message for users who are logged on, or you can also make it a task with a reminder. Then you simply type in the message that you want to send. So in this case, log out of GP now. And then you can hit send. And what they will see is this little message here. So it would say Microsoft Dynamics GP, log out of GP now with all our exclamation points. So very nice. It's a way to hit everybody while they're in GP and give them that pop-up if you have a couple that are finishing something up. So this is Appendix 2. This is the SmartList for unposted transactions. So you could start under purchasing and payables transactions, and then transactions by vendor. And then we can add a few columns. So if you add the batch number, the document status, and the posting date to your columns, then you'd click search and add a filter for the document status is equal to unposted. And the transaction date is less than the first day of the new fiscal year or period. Once you have those in, you should see a quick little exception report that shows you those unposted AP transactions. At that point, you can hit the favorites button, add a name for it, and click the add button and add favorite to save. This way you'll have it to use anytime during your month end or year end closes. So SmartList to verify the history settings. This is the same as what we did on the sales side to add those on. So we can verify the SmartList would be sales. In this case, it says payables, but customers and customer balance. Here we would click columns, and you could remove the customer balance column and then click add, and you could hold down control and add the keep history for calendar, distribution, period, and transactions. So you could hold down your shift or control and grab all four of those. Then click OK and click favorites to add, and you can give it your new name and click on add to save that favorite. So that way you'll have it for next time. Finally, you can set up an account roll-up inquiry. This can be really helpful if you have several accounts that roll up, like cost of goods sold or payables or receivables, and it's easier to have one total to compare to the subledger. This is under inquiry, financial, and then account roll-up. And so you can give it a name, and then when you hit modify, it pops open this options screen where I can choose how many columns I want, how I want to sort it, and what I want to show up in each of those columns. Once I filled in the options screen, I can hit save and then run my inquiry. So at any point I could go check my cost of goods sold and see my actuals versus last year and then the difference. Of course, if I grab any of these and drilled in, I'd be able to get to the individual accounts that are in the roll-up. So first you see the rolled up amount, but then you would be able to get to those individual account balances as well. So Appendix 5, this is the SmartList to verify the 1099 vendor setup. So here we would go under SmartLists to purchasing, vendors, and then vendor balance, and add columns for the 1099 type, tax ID number, tax registration number, the vendor check name, and then optionally you could add the year-to-date paid or the date of the last payment. Then click search and filter out where the 1099 type is not equal to, and make that make the value in the drop down not a 1099 vendor. And then click on favorites and add. So again, you'd give it a name and click add to save that favorite. Appendix 6, this is the SmartList to verify the account, GL account setup. So here we would find financial and then accounts, and you would click on columns and add the main account segment, and then sort by that main account segment to find the accounts with the wrong posting type. So typically all the accounts below 4,000 are the balance sheet, and above that are P&L. So it usually stands out really quickly if you have something that is set up wrong. Anyone that you see that is incorrect like this, you could double click. It'll take you right to the account maintenance screen where you can make that change and save that account. Once you're done, if you hit refresh on the SmartList, everything should be corrected. Appendix 7, so this is reconciling to the general ledger. This was part of all of our period end close processes, was to reconcile to the GL and balance, make sure everything is correct. So here is a nice little routine that has been added to GP. Depending on what version you're on, you may just see payables and receivables. On more recent versions, you will also have inventory control and bank rec. So the way this screen works is it gives you a reconciliation number and the date. Then you put in the date range you want to reconcile, the module you're reconciling, and then on the right, the account numbers that you want to reconcile to in the GL. So in this case, payables, so I want to put in all of my AP accounts. Then you want to choose an output file. So here you just click on the little folder and choose where you want to store that file, and you can give it a different name if you want. Once you're ready, you hit process. Now, normally when we hit process on something that says reconcile in GP, it is making adjustments. It is changing our records, our data to correct something. In this case, it's not. So a lot of people are scared to hit this process button, but they shouldn't be. All we're doing is creating an Excel spreadsheet that's going to help you to tie it out. So all of this information at the bottom will populate, and it also will automatically pop you into a new Excel spreadsheet. So in this case, I have payables to the general ledger, reconciliation here. Payables would be on the left, general ledger transactions are on the right. And in this case, I am off a little bit. So I can see my dollar amounts in each of these accounts and what it should be. And we do have an unmatched transaction here that's showing up on the general ledger side. So it looks like somebody did a journal entry, this journal entry 3451, and hit AP directly. And it didn't go through the subledger. So if this made us out of balance, then we would want to go and see why that was done and maybe how it should have been processed. So that is the beauty of this report. If there is a needle in the haystack, hopefully it's going to help you find it a bit more quickly. And if there's not anything wrong, then it's just a way to save a file and say, yes, I did that. We balanced and everything looks good. So it can be a nice, quick way to dump all those transactions out to Excel and make them easy to evaluate. Finally, if you need a little bit more help than that, if you use that Reconcile tool and it's just not quite enough information, there is something called the Closer from Reporting Central, and this is an add-on. It'll give you the reason that you're out of balance. So you can actually click on which subledger, and it will tell you exactly how much you're off and as much information as it can, as well as the variance. Again, if you need any additional assistance, we have these books available for purchase. If you'd like to have a hard copy, you can contact Tom Hopkins, our training coordinator. If you need help installing that year-end update, We're available to help you with that as well. That would be US-GP upgrades at
Spring.
columbusglobal.com. Yes, ma'am.
We're running out of time, but I wanted to get 2 questions in real
Oh,
quick.
yes, go ahead.
One, someone's asking if the webinar is available as a recorded session to re-listen.
We are recording it, and I believe we will be publishing it. I'm not sure exactly when, but it will be available to rewatch.
Yes, it
Just not
is.
sure on the timing.
And then finally, in GL closing, are the GL trial balances reports the ones from Management Reporter or trial balance report from within GP itself?
I would do the one from within GP itself, simply because if there's a new account that you forgot to add into Management Reporter, that could make something off, whereas the one in GP would always include all accounts.
One more question. Oh, he's just saying thank you. Excellent information. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Glad to hear it. I hope it was helpful for everyone, and good luck with year-end close.